Good evening, everybody. Welcome to yet another Ask Professor Paranormal Q&A. I see some of our regulars here and someone else, Mo Johan. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. And of course, we'll have more people joining us. Um, it is, God, it's hard to believe we're coming up to the end of the year again and entering the holiday season, which is kind of weird. So we have one more show left for 2025, and that'll be coming up in 2 weeks. I'll just remind everybody about that later. And then we jump to January 11th. So again, I want you to mark your calendars if you want to, that we're just going to skip 3 weeks So it's going to be December 21st and then January 11th. And I've mentioned this before. I will have my first guest ever on this show, and that will be Steve Gonzalez from Ghost Hunters. A number of reasons why I'm having him on. One of them is the fact that he knows something about parapsychology, which I can't say about the rest of the people who have done that show or most of the other ghost shows for that matter. So anyway, as all of you know, this is your time to ask me questions, to toss out topics. It doesn't have to be a question. I certainly can comment on things as well as things go on. I thought I'd mention right off the bat that I did another interview for the Telepathy Tapes, which is a well-known podcast I think a lot of you may know about. And this year, they've mainly in the past talked about the research with autistic kids. This time around, apparently, the new season 3, they'll be discussing issues, talking about ESP and mediumship and such, working with Alzheimer's patients and folks, some with other kinds of dementia as well, which should be pretty interesting. So they were asking me, I was being asked about what the connection might be, whether there's anything in that area. And I will mention that some mediums, including some of the ones that I've worked with, and maybe Kathy, you might comment on this if you have any experience with this, but some mediums have been able to have communication with people who are in that state, who are in a state of dementia, who have Alzheimer's. And there also have been mediums who have been able to communicate with people in coma, which has been pretty interesting, picking up information and kind of getting stuff back. And interestingly enough, in a couple of instances that I've heard about where people came out of coma, they remembered that communication, which is kind of important as well. So it seems that our consciousness is intact, even if our bodies and brains are not apparently behaving properly, which says something very important about what consciousness is. And I think most of you may have, I'm sure, have heard about the deathbed visions and of people who are terminal, and some of whom have been they were Alzheimer's patients, or they were in coma or highly sedated, and they suddenly, before they die, as they're in the process of dying, they come out of whatever state they're in. And that's a state now called hyperlucidity, where even the folks who had Alzheimer's and who couldn't even recognize anyone in their family or have communication or remember anything, suddenly can remember everything, who can communicate well with everybody in the family, recognize everybody, know what's going on. And then they often will talk about seeing or perceiving a family member who's passed away, a friend who's passed away, someone they know who is there to help them transition to the next state, to help them die, more or less, and move on. And then that happens. They go back into the original state they're in, and they pass away. So the hyperlucidity right now is an interesting thing because, of course, everyone in neuroscience is trying to explain it. The people who don't want to go towards the psychic end of things are trying to come up with all sorts of explanations for what's going on in the brain in the process of dying. It doesn't happen to everybody, which is really interesting, of course. So it's just a very interesting perspective. And Kathy says, you've had a spirit bring to your attention that someone here who has dementia or in a confused state, they give me clear here versus their feeling. So I know that they're talking about the person in the living. That's good. It's good to know. And I think that's something that I've heard from certainly it is something I've heard from other mediums as well. But there's something, when there's so much going on right now with discussion of consciousness, I think there are more and more people in the mainstream sciences who are coming to the realization that there's something more than the material, the physical, as we think of it. Although there was recent research I just read, I haven't read the actual research report, but there was a report on a research report that identifies that our hearts, because our hearts do have a neural network, essentially, like the brain does and like our gut does, our hearts hold memory, which is a whole interesting step forward to where memory might be for consciousness, but also in the body, and might explain why people who get organ transplants, certainly heart transplants, suddenly have sometimes have new likes and dislikes that relate to the person whose art it was, or even some memories, even skills have come through. This is something that was going on for a long time. So there's a lot we don't know. In fact, the amount we don't know about the brain and how things work, our consciousness in our bodies, is the amount we don't know is surpasses absolutely what we do know. But there's that whole non-material idea, the idea that everything's not physical as in matter. There's a lot more going on is important. And that's really important for us in parapsychology because that's something we've been talking about for a long time, at least some people in the field. Not everybody in parapsychology is a proponent of survival of bodily death or consciousness outside the body. There's a bunch of materialists in our field as well, but it is important for us that these elements keep popping up and that the mainstream is starting to get interested. And some of those people in the mainstream have come to our field to talk to people about survival, which is really important. Okay, scientific spirituality 8. Temperature changes are related to paranormal effects. Nope, actually not. There are I mean, there can be temperature changes, but the reality is it's mainly folklore that people talk about changes in temperature or feeling changes in temperature or its normal explanations. There are very few circumstances, very few cases where somebody says there's a cold spot over here and someone's having an actual experience with a ghost, let's say, or a haunting, that there's actually a temperature difference. We can feel cold or we can feel hot because of things going on in our body, but also because of psychological issues. There is that kind of cold chill you might feel for whatever reason. Sometimes you get a chill like, the old someone has just walked over my grave kind of thing. And there are circumstances that work that way. But the whole idea of spirits needing to pull energy from an environment so they leave cold spots behind, or by doing that, they're creating a hot spot. That's folklore. That can happen. It has happened in poltergeist cases as well, which are related to living people in psychokinesis. Um, but certainly psychokinesis, telekinesis, can technically affect things at the molecular or even the atomic level, possibly even and seemingly the quantum level as well, which can certainly change the temperature in the room. So that is possible also. It's just that we don't normally see that with with entities doing that. That's not a normal thing. It can happen. Just one case that I did we did for a TV pilot years ago in Florida when it was 97 degrees in Central Florida in July in a house that had no air conditioning, did have ceiling fans, but no air conditioning. It was measured 97 in the room throughout the house actually. And late at night, we had a Japanese TV crew with us. We had an American TV crew with us. There was absolutely activity earlier in the evening one night, and the second night, the Japanese medium, Mrs. Gibo, sat down in this one room, which was where it was kind of the living room, more or less, the family room of a house built right after the Civil War, and a lot of activity related to a child who had died of tuberculosis after the Civil War when the family moved into the house. Mrs. Gibo had communicated we had two really major things happen. The first night, we had Mrs. Gibo talking to the ghost. Every piece of environmental equipment we had was going off, showing anomalies, including a geomagnetic sensing station, every bit of it. And it all kind of pointed to where she was claiming the little girl's ghost was. So that's environmental corroboration. The next night, Mrs. Gibo on thermal vision, as well as a regular camera, and we were watching, all of us, with the exception of the producer who was with her, were watching from another room. The room was 97 degrees. That's the air temperature. And as we're watching Mrs. Gibo having a conversation with this little girl's ghost, she made some comment, which was translated for me, that she was uncomfortable because it was warm. And over the next 20 minutes, on thermal vision, we could see the walls getting darker, meaning the temperature of the walls was changing, was getting cooler. And at one point, we all got in, we went into that room and it was 75 degrees air temperature. That's part of it. So that's a cool space, not a cold spot. But the other important thing to know is that the couple who owned the house were in a bedroom that had a doorway that led into the family room. They heard the commotion in this room, in the family room, because we all came, a bunch of us went in there. And they opened the door. They woke up. It woke them up, which was a good thing because Bob and Linda said, our room is suddenly really, really hot. And we measured their room at 110 degrees. And in fact, one side of the side of the door to their room that was facing the family room was cooler than the side of the door that was to their bedroom, as if heat was transferring rather than molecular change in some other way. It's a really interesting thing that happened. But this we think was because Mrs. Gibo said it was because she asked to be cooler. So I guess ghosts have that ability sometimes. We just don't find that that's necessary for their existence. That idea comes from spiritualism and had to do with mostly the phony spiritualists. And it's been kind of uh, codified by, frankly, movies made that folklore. Okay, let's see. John Hasted, the physicist, said he witnessed objects become hot as they were moved in poltergeist cases. So, and that is true. I mean, I know Hasted's thing, and that has happened. I mean, poltergeist cases, of course, come from living people, and psychokinesis can actually change temperature as you're affecting the molecular structure. In fact, at the spoon bending events that I've run or been part of, even way back when Jack Houck, the aerospace engineer who first started running them, the spoons that seem to melt or flop over on their own feel warm, not hot, but they do absolutely feel warm. And then they go back to their normal state when they stop bending at that point. So there's some, molecular movement does cause heat. Molecular slowdown causes cold, of course, for that. And actually, there was there were some studies with Ingo Swann, and I don't recall who the other psychic was, who could do psychokinesis to lower the temperature or raise it, basically affecting a thermometer, a thermistor. So PK can do those kinds of things for sure. Just like in poltergeist cases, we sometimes have little fire bursts as well. Nothing like, major fires, at least as far as we know. All right, Kathy, I looked at the name at the Monroe Institute of Hearing, the famous Joe McMoneagle remote viewer. 1 2-day course is over. Yeah, A49. Anyone who's attended this. I don't know anybody off the top of my head. I can't name somebody. I know people who have taken various classes, including remote viewing courses at the Monroe Institute. I mean, Joe's a great teacher. I know Joe pretty well, not as well as I'd like, but he's a great teacher. He's very down to earth. Um, when people ask me what's the best way to learn remote viewing, because there are all these courses that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. I think 849 is, if it's a course with Joe McMoneagle, I think it's worth it. But you could also start out by reading his book, Remote Viewing Secrets, which is, I think, $4.99 on Kindle. So that's a first step in many respects. The alternative also is to take one of our Rhine classes. Every so often, another one of the Stargate remote viewers, Paul Smith, does teach a remote viewing 4-week class, which is usually around 100 and something dollars. That's taught through the Rhine Education Center. Next time will probably be either in the spring or in the summer that'll be offered in general. Scientific spirit wasn't implying that spirits were responsible for temp change. Yeah, I'm glad you said that also. But, the idea of telekinesis, I don't know about an electron cloud shift, but certainly affecting molecular structures, moving the molecules in the air faster or slower, slowing down molecular movement. If you read comic books, there are superheroes who can do that. So they don't really call it psychic. But yeah, those kinds of things with PK certainly would make sense from a physics perspective at some point. Let's see here. Have you ever visited a university? No, I've not been to, I've been to Charlottesville. I've been to the University of Virginia before I really got into parapsychology. I've been to Charlottesville for a mediumship conference. but I have not actually visited the DOPS, the Division of Perceptual Studies, their offices. Something I'd like to do at some point, because hang out with them a little bit. Maybe one of my trips next time to North Carolina, I can do a side trip to Virginia. So, um, and that brings up one other thing. For those of you who are on the Rhine Research Center's uh, email list, and if you're not, you should be. It's just Rhine, RHINE.org. Get on the email list. Keep up with the latest that's happening with the Rhine. The next few months are going to be pretty quiet for the Rhine in terms of research. Research is on hold right now, and some other things are on hold because at the moment, although not in this particular interest, but over the next couple of weeks, John Kruth, the executive director, who's also research director, is finalizing packing up everything in the Rhine for the movers. We had, and you may hear out there in the greater web space that people saying, "What's going on with the Rhine? There seems to be something wrong with the Rhine." Some of our colleagues have gotten very concerned because they heard that the Rhine Center had to move out of the building. And it's not because we're not paying the rent. It's because the landlord, the original owner of the property, was one of our board members, and unfortunately, he's not doing well health-wise. He's an older guy, and his family has basically sold the building out from under us. So we were given notice that we had to move, and I think we have to be out by the 15th, by next week. And then everything's going into storage while we look for a new property. The good news is that the Rhine Research Center is in the best financial state it's been in a long time. It doesn't mean that the Rhine doesn't need donations to keep going, but it is in its best situation where we've already been pre-approved for a loan to buy property. The Rhine has been leasing the property in Durham for a long, long time. And what's coming up is going to be actually ownership, which will be great for us. And we're just looking for the right space. We thought we had the right space, but the owner of the space didn't take our offer, even though the property we were looking at was highly overpriced, according to the market, like really well overpriced. We gave a pretty decent offer above what it was worth, but right now we're still in search mode. So anybody in the Durham, North Carolina area who knows commercial real estate, anybody out there, you might offer some suggestions to us. So we look forward to actually getting in there in the next few months, whatever we buy. And when that happens, we'll have a big, like grand opening reception. I'll make my way back to North Carolina from California. So looking forward to that at some point. So the research is on hold. Otherwise, nothing else is on hold. Events are not on hold because they'll be virtual. The Journal of Parapsychology is being worked on. Some other things are still happening. So the only thing that's really going to be on hold will be, for the moment, will be the research there. Hey, Lopaka, Mysteries of Hawaii. Good to see you here. So for those of you who don't know Mysteries of Hawaii, you should be following Mysteries of Hawaii on YouTube. Lopaka Kapanui has great stories to tell about Hawaiian supernatural and paranormal things. So definitely do that. And he's also got some good books out, including a pretty cool novel called Kahuna. So definitely take a look for his stuff. All right. That got us off to a nice start go ahead. Anyone else have anything right off the bat they can pop in with? And if not, I'll try to come up with something else to talk about here off the top of my head. So I'll just give it a moment here to see if anybody's had any questions at all. And I don't want to have any dead space here. So I'll just mention that for those of you who follow the paranormal TV shows, I'm hoping you're following them because you find them entertaining and not instructional. And I'm just about to grade a final quiz for one of the classes I teach, which is an advanced field investigations course. And the last question I asked them as part of the discussion forum, asked the students, was what would you say to any ghost hunter who says that ghost hunting has nothing to do with parapsychology? Um, so that's an important question, and I because I have been told that by ghost hunters I've met over the years, and partly that seems to be because the TV shows have ignored parapsychologists or purposely didn't want to have parapsychologists involved. That was certainly the case with Ghost Hunters in its early inception, and even Paranormal State when it was on. So Ghost Hunters had Steve Gonzalez, who knows quite a bit about parapsychology. Paranormal State had Sergey, who knew a lot about parapsychology. I had a lot of time to talk with him at one point on the phone, and that just never came up. And in fact, some of these shows have said that ghost hunting has that paranormal investigation of apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists has nothing to do with parapsychology. And the fact is, it has everything to do with parapsychology, and there wouldn't be ghost hunting without, um, or at least understanding of what might be going on without parapsychological stuff in the background. But we have 140 plus years of history of ghost hunting, of investigations. And actually, even before that, there were researchers, psychical researchers, who were doing ghost hunting as well. And it goes back quite a ways for that. It looks like there's some choppiness of my signal right now for some reason. All right, so let me go back to the questions, and then I can come back to this other issue. With the new year approaching, do you feel predictions for the next year are worth discussing? I do not do them, but some psychics do. I mean, they're always interesting to discuss. The problem is that the future, to paraphrase Yoda, the future is always in motion. And there are often, unless it's kind of like weather prediction. I mean, honestly, precognition is like weather prediction. You can take all the information in the world about the weather and about worldwide weather and about local weather. And I think with AI, we'll be able to get better at predicting the weather. And you could put it, assess that from a purely scientific perspective, even in very instinctual perspective, very intuitive perspective, make a prediction about what the weather's going to be next week, what the temperature is going to be, whether a storm's going to hit, all of that. And you're wrong. We all know that weather prediction is as well. The fact is, weather prediction is a science, but it's as much art as it is science. And different things can affect the weather that were unanticipated. The closer in time from prediction to weather that one makes that prediction about the weather, the better the prediction. So predicting something in 6 hours is more likely to be true or close to as accurate as possible as something 6 days in advance. And the further out you try to predict things, the worse it is. It's the same thing with prediction of world events, the same thing in prediction, especially when human beings are involved. That is a problem because we make decisions. And sometimes there is an outside, something that wasn't encountered or considered for those decisions that could happen. Or something might have happened on a physical basis in the world that affected things. The weather could change. A hurricane could suddenly decide to change pathways, and that changes a whole lot of predictions that somebody makes. So while predictions are interesting, all I can say is I just saw something recently that said Northern California is likely to have a 7.0 or greater earthquake. Not in the near future, but in the next 15 years. Used to be when I first moved to California, I would hear seismologists every 5 years would say there's going to be a major earthquake in the next 30 years, sometime in the next 30 years. And that 30 years kept moving. We did have a major earthquake in 1989, but those predictions kept moving, and they really don't have enough information about the future, about Earth movements, because there's other things that can affect that. And so, yeah, I don't know that they're worth discussing. Some psychics make predictions. Some psychics are paid to make predictions. That used to be the case with the tabloids, that they always had like the top 10 predictions from the top psychics. I knew one back in the early 80s who said she said it's my predictions are no better than throwing darts at a dartboard, which is really interesting in itself. So it's not it's worth for interest's sake. That's all that it's worth. In fact, I would go back. There are plenty of books out there or articles online where people have made predictions and take a look at how many of them actually came true. They should be pretty specific too. All right, Jedi Mischief, music, excuse me. If a spirit was blind and deaf in life, how do you think they would choose to communicate? Well, first of all, without the body, that spirit certainly can perceive the world through ESP, through, basically psychic ability. That's how spirits, anyone without a body who doesn't have physical senses, the only way they can perceive the world is through non-physical senses, what we call psychic abilities, psychic senses in many respects. So now how they would choose to communicate, a lot of mediums talk about communication, not all, but talk about communication being very symbolic or conceptual. So it's not necessarily word for word. But if somebody was blind and deaf in life, how would they have communicated in life? If they could communicate in life, they can communicate in death. It may not be the same. It's certainly not going to be the same fashion because they're not going to appear as an apparition to somebody and just talk. That's typically not how it works. Um, and I've heard of cases where somebody saw a relative who was deaf, who the spirit appeared to them after they died, and they did hear the voice of the spirit, and the spirit's voice was very clear. It's a mental communication; it's not actual sound. So, it's going to be, how in the world could somebody communicate with a medium or psychic if they were in coma? It's you don't have to worry about that. So, um, Lapaka, the difference between feeling spirits of a place opposed to feeling history of a place. That's a good question. Well, spirits of a place, if you mean actual conscious entities versus the haunting, I mean, certainly we feel history in places that have history. And I think that a lot of that it's purely psychological. I mean, you feel the weight of history on places that some part of you knows had history. But then you can feel other things too, like information, pick up stuff about the location as well. A true haunting, a true residual haunting. And then we have the idea that some spirits just kind of hang out at a place. And you can have both. You can actually have all three. You can feel the weight of history in a place like Gettysburg. And perhaps then you pick up the information in Gettysburg battlefield of the actual battle. And there might be a few spirits who happen by as well. So all those things can actually happen as well. But I think the difference is really asking yourself what you're picking up and how much you're picking up. So a residual haunting is basically a form of psychometry, and that's actually picking up on history. It could be recent history or a long ago history, but picking up people, dead people, spirits is a different thing altogether. It's consciousness. Does consciousness regain all senses after death of the body? Well, consciousness, we talk about senses. ESP is not sensory, it's perception. So they don't necessarily have senses because we talk about definition of a sense as having a physical structure in a body. And if you don't have a physical body, you don't have senses, but you have perception and picking up perception of sound, perception of visual acuity, all of that. That's directly non-sensory information and non-sensory perception. So someone who is deaf, I mean, even somebody who's deaf in life could conceivably pick up the information carried in sound in a voice through ESP. There are people who call themselves clairaudient. They can hear, and clairaudience does not depend on your actual physical hearing. Seeing things visually with ESP when you're alive or dead does not depend on your eyes. It's all about perception. Perception is not the same as sensing. Your senses give you data to your brains, which gets processed into perceptions. additional information coming in through ESP, extrasensory or non-sensory perception, gets added to the same perception, the same thing that you actually end up with that. So it very much differs from time to time. All right, let's see. Hi, AJ True Crime, welcome. Okay, so before we get to another question, I'll just kind of go back to what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago about this question I asked my students. What do you say to somebody, to a ghost hunter who says parapsychology has nothing to do with ghost hunting? You know, um, First thing that you can ask, and a couple of my students really nailed this, asking them what they think parapsychology is or why they think parapsychology has nothing to do with it. And there seemed to be the message from a lot of the ghost hunting TV shows, the parapsychologists are only in the lab. And that is so not true. Laboratory research depends on people's experiences being reported. That's where we get the ideas to do laboratory studies to begin with. And some of those experiences cannot be brought into the lab like apparition experiences, but mediumship research is happening in laboratories. But again, a good section of parapsychology is field work, not only asking people about their experiences, surveying them, interviewing people. It's also going out and checking out or trying to find the phenomena that we call apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists outside the laboratory. So to say that parapsychology has nothing to do with ghost hunting, when the original ghost hunters in the 19th century were psychical researchers, in other words, that's the precursor name to parapsychology, is kind of ridiculous. And in fact, parapsychology deals with, besides survival of bodily death, which certainly encompasses the apparitional stuff, parapsychology deals with extrasensory or non-sensory perception. Again, if a ghost is around, a spirit's around, how do you think they're seeing you? It's certainly not with any eyes. So knowing something about ESP from that perspective is important, but how you're seeing the ghost is ESP. So you need to know about it from that perspective. Yes, we study it in the lab, we study it outside the lab. If a ghost moves something, that's psychokinesis or telekinesis. We study that in the lab, we study it outside the lab. Poltergeist phenomena is purely psychokinesis from the living. We study it in the lab, we study it outside the lab. Hauntings relate to picking up information with your psychic abilities, with some form of ESP. So it's so interconnected that you can't separate the two in many respects. All right, Jody Music herself. Let's see, just curious if how our conscious forms are universal or based on life experiences as someone is perceiving through lens of schizophrenia in life versus what style consciousness survives, for example. Um, that's a tough question. I mean, we only get that from um, mostly from mediums, sometimes from psychics, sometimes from witnesses, for the ghosts, for the apparitions or the spirits who stick around here before they move on to the other side. It does seem that um, at least at first, when people are sticking around, that they haven't changed their personality. They might have, if they were a bully or an a-hole in life, they're still going to be similar to that because they haven't figured it out yet. Some people seem to carry with them psychological issues, so that can carry through. But I haven't heard of situations where someone who is a schizophrenic, when they're communicating back from the other side through a medium, where schizophrenia is evident. It's that evident in that sense. Because so much of it depends on our brain structure, the physical. And again, we are, whether consciousness starts in the brain, whether it is starts outside the brain and comes into the brain, we're kind of the interface between consciousness, and the physical body is the interface between consciousness and the rest of the world. So if something's wrong with my brain, this could affect how consciousness, how if it comes out in the communication process or even the behavior process. But it doesn't mean that that consciousness itself has been affected in that way, any more than I've used this analogy before, that if you are watching a streaming service and suddenly you have a problem with your router or your smart TV, which is picking up the Wi-Fi signal, if there's a problem with the interfaces, does that mean the streaming signal has stopped? No, it's still there and it hasn't changed at all. So you have to be careful. Um, and Kathy Nadal is one of the mediums for the Forever Family Foundation. You've had Spirit explain that they deal with mental health diagnosis in life, similarly make me hold my head or make me feel how they felt. I would expect that Spirit wants to try to communicate that. There are ways to do that, that in life they were like this and they can communicate that. I certainly have heard that before. So that makes perfect sense to me, Kathy. Thank you for adding that in. So, there's a lot that's still there's so much we don't know about consciousness. We don't have an agreed upon definition in mainstream science. Frankly, there are not agreed upon definitions of certain things in psychology. And there are different schools of psychological thought. And the thing to remember is that when you're dealing with human beings and behavior and thought and all of that, emotions, all of that, it's social science. Um, People talk about the ghost hunting shows, they always kind of dismiss, or not always, but many of them dismiss anecdotal evidence. Other folks just dismiss witness testimony about their experiences. Well, frankly, the entire field of psychology is mainly, other than experimental psychology, which itself doesn't have a great success in certain areas. It's certainly no more replicable than parapsychology experiments. Um, but so much depends on human beings and the way we actually approach things. And just as an example, if any of you have taken Psych 101 classes in college, Intro to Psych, you're probably it was either a requirement or suggested that you participate in experiments at your university or college that the grad students were running. I know that we had to do 3 experiments when we took Intro to Psych. And I got to tell you that one of them, at least, I didn't really, I really didn't care. I didn't care about any of them, except one of the experimenters was really, and this is something that affects outcomes. If the experimenter's friendly, then there's going to be a better outcome. And we see that across all fields of science. And I didn't care. I did not give probably honest answers to things, and they may have accounted for that from college students who didn't care, but that affects the outcomes. And so when I hear someone say, we're dismissing this because this person's experience might have been affected by their memory, it might have been, so, okay, great. You know what? That's everything. Somebody tells me, looks angry is one thing. Are they really feeling anger, or are they putting that outward expression on because they don't like you or something else? Or vice versa. We know people who don't show anger, who are very, very angry, keep it bottled up. There's so many variations of human beings. We just don't have a set explanation or understanding. And when it comes to consciousness, much of mainstream science is trying to explain it from a materialist perspective. Some in neuroscience, some in physics and other areas in biology are including the idea that maybe something about consciousness is not in the body or it extends beyond the body. But it boils down to there's a lot we don't know. And I think it's most important for people to say, we're not there yet. In fully knowing we can only provide the information we get from practitioners or from witnesses. Okay. Paul, I'm glad you're a member of the Forever Family Foundation. Um, that intense quote, let's see here. I might have missed something there, Mary Prankster. Uh, the subway ghost instructing Sam about channeling his spirit energy, that whole element of we are not our bodies, so you have to think something to move, which is that message. The subway ghost, Vince Chiavarelli, I think was the actor, telling Sam, Patrick Swayze's character, how to move something. This is the subway ghost who's knocking newspapers out of people's hands. It's all mental. It's psychokinesis. Again, if a ghost moves something, it's psychokinesis. And It's not a surprise that that scene is actually in there and that evidence, that information is there because the screenwriter used my first book, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, and one of Rogo's books as research for the film. So, and that's sort of in my book and sort of it's somewhat in Scott's books as well. You take all your emotions, all your pain, all your love, all your passion, all your rage, just push it all the way down in the pit of your stomach, then let it explode like a reactor. That is one way to go. It is not about focusing, or excuse me, not about concentrating. I think that anything to do with psychokinesis can be very emotional, but the actual experience of psychokinesis is not emotional. It's a release of emotion in many respects. It's a focus and a release of emotion in many respects. AJ crime, true crime, fact is that there are ways to bring out PK for people. My late friend Martin Caden taught me quite a bit about this. My Mind Over Matter book is currently out of print. I'm going to try and get it back into print soon. I had hoped to get it in before this, but there's a whole section on how to do PK based on Martin Caden's PK activity and what he was teaching people. And it had to do with focusing and thinking about the end result, not on trying, make it move kind of thing. It's really kind of holding down, and then there is a release of energy and emotion that happens with that. But that is very, very possible. All right, Paul, you did an interview on Oh, that's great. Seeking Eye podcast. That's a great podcast. And it really is, psychokinesis is an interesting thing. We are held back from doing PK psychologically. When it really comes right down to it, there are several elements we have to get past to do psychokinesis at all. All about belief and our history. So Kenneth Batcheldor, who was a psychologist in the 1960s and 70s and doing parapsychology research, studied psychokinesis and the psychology of psychokinesis and came up with a couple of important points. Because of our culture, if we saw something moving or flying across the room, most people immediately second guess, write it off, logically explain it. We don't accept it as psychokinesis, even if somebody said it was really psychokinesis. We don't accept that because it's too weird, it's too strange, it's too out of the ordinary. This is called witness inhibition. The second thing is called ownership resistance. It's one thing for somebody else to move something, but for me to do it, that's crazy. Even if you want to do it, there's still programming in us that prevents us sometimes from doing it. So setting up circumstances in which it's possible, in the case of Martin Caden, moving small objects. We did a workshop at the University of Nebraska, sponsored by a local group, and some of the faculty members attended, but it was mostly people from the community. And we had 102 people in the audience. Marty had everybody trying to move these small objects in front of them. And one person got a little bit of movement after he explained the process. When he further explained it and then showed people that he could do it, and this one other person was able to do it, we ended up with 52 out of the 102 who were able to do it. Marty always said that if you can see somebody else doing it and you accept that as real, and you accept that, hey, this is a pretty cool thing because it's not really major, it's a lot easier. When I've done workshops myself on PK, used to do them locally through a local school, and there was one that I did which had real success with the students. One of the students, when she got this object moving a little bit, just kind of a pinwheel kind of thing, I watched her eyes widened and she's like sat back like this with her hands up. She freaked out. She came to learn to do this. She freaked out. And she wasn't able to get it to go again after that. So that's one thing. Second thing is these spoon bending parties or events, PK parties, are designed psychologically to get people past witness inhibition and ownership resistance. And we typically have almost everybody bending stuff. So there are ways that you can actually do that. If folks want to run their own PK party or spoon bending party, feel free to send me an email. My email is in the channel description. Send me an email. I will send you the instructions on how to have your own PK party. But if you don't do them the way that I've described, you can't do them virtually. You got to do them with a lot of people. You got to have fun. You got to get silly. That's the only way they work. Okay. Back to questions. I have heard a theory that people who pass need time to adjust to new reality. They shouldn't be contacted immediately. I have never heard that. I mean, I heard people saying, believing that, but I think in many respects, this is for the living, not for the dead. If you lose someone close to you, it may not be in your best psychological interest to immediately go to a medium. I think maybe Kathy can speak up on this one as well. It's just not probably good for you psychologically at that point. You need to process some grief first, I think. Now, plenty of situations where people communicate with a spirit briefly after the person has just died. The person shows up to them, there's communication, and then they move on. Maybe there's an adjustment period on the other side, but it's really more for the living that we shouldn't try to do immediately communication. I mean, you can try yourself. I think it's always good to mentally say, put the word out to that person if they want to. Yeah. All right. Again, I don't have your email. So here's again, what I'd like you to do is I'm just going to put the email in here. All right. With this email, just send me a note. So I have your email to send this to. I'll send you a PDF. And the note is simply, you can even have on the subject line, send me the spoon bending or send me the PK party information. There you go. No, you're not asking too many questions. Don't worry about it. All right. Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that both your parents are gone. That's sad. But once you feel ready, you'll know when you're ready. Kathy has said, refer to David Kessler for grief therapy if I feel they're not ready for a reading. The other thing is, let's see if I can pull this out really quickly. All right. The Forever Family Foundation has worked with a man, Dr. Piero Calvi Parasetti, on a workbook. This is the workbook. It's on Amazon. You can buy it yourselves. It's called Love Knows No Death. And it is a workbook for grief, for working through your grief. It is, as you work through it, you end up with links to videos, which helps. It's not just the workbook, there are actually supporting videos that come along as well. So if it's very recent, this is a helpful piece. We give this to everyone at our grief retreats when they come to them. This is a helpful way to deal with it. It's not, the whole idea of the 5 stages of grief, that's just a real stereotype. It's not the same for everybody. So this is one thing you can actually do. And again, it's on Amazon. Love Knows No Death, just a workbook on grief. There are also grief cards that the Windbridge Research Center, Julie Beischel, has put out. They're cards to actually help you through your grief. So if you're, again, and the Windbridge Research Center does significant work with mediums as well. All right. Caitlin says, "Don't worry, I bug them with questions all the time." Yeah, don't worry about that. That's what this is for people to ask questions. And I've lost people too, people close to me over the years, and it does take process. You have to process through things as well. After my dad passed away, I waited several months before I had a medium friend of mine, had Annette Martin try to communicate with him. So, and I didn't know she'd be able to connect at that point. And yeah, definitely group hug with this. So it is hard losing anyone in your family. We certainly see that with the grief retreats, and but communication does work, and it does help with grief. And the thing you have to remember is, are you ready? It shouldn't be that you need to process a little bit before you feel ready for that. Oh yeah, okay. So I can tell you, yeah. So thanks, Kathy, for the reminder. So um, June of 2006, I was in New York, in the New York area for a psychic entertainers meeting, and actually New Jersey. And then I spent some time with my folks in Peekskill, New York. And then I went home and I saw my dad, and he had back problems. So that was pretty much it. Now he had had surgery months before for to remove a small portion of one of his lungs because there was some cancer there. And he actually reacted very negatively to chemo after that. So I get home less than later after I get home, my mom calls me to tell me my father had collapsed and was in the ICU at the local hospital, which was 5 minutes away from where their house was. So I got, next day I was able to get a flight out, went there and spent time talking to him in the ICU, spent time with my mom, my family, and eventually one day, actually my mom woke me up because the hospital called. It was like 3 in the morning, and we need to get to the hospital because his organs were failing, and it's time to pretty much pull him off respirator and such. So we called my other brother, my one of my brothers who lived about a half hour away, um, to come up as soon as possible, and then went over to the hospital. Waited for my brother Ron to come in, spent some time with my father. My brother David lived about an hour and a half away in Brooklyn, so we couldn't wait for him. So I spent a couple of minutes alone before they terminated the uh, respirator. Said some things to my dad. Honestly, I also, mentally, as soon as they pulled the plug, I mentally said, you're okay. Um, I just mentally said some stuff. So my mother and my brother Ron were waiting outside the where my dad's room was, and we start walking towards the waiting room. It's close to 5 o'clock in the morning, maybe a couple minutes after. It wasn't exactly five, and we're waiting for my other brother to show up. We're going to wait in the waiting room for him to come. As we walk into the waiting room, no one else is in the waiting room. It's five, it's 5 in the morning. Um, the TV turns on. It was not on a timer, did check, but it not only turned on, it then switched channels. It switched to a sports channel, to a ESPN channel. And my dad, for those of you who don't know, Dick Auerbach was a major producer for NBC Sports. He produced the 1972 Winter Olympics in Sapporo, Japan. He had been an associate producer on a previous Olympics in Tokyo in 64, but he did the game of the week. He did skiing events. He did martial. He did all sorts of events, and was eventually had his own company, which had as its star attraction for the year that he produced was the international coverage of the Rose Bowl parade and the Rose Bowl itself. So for it to change channels, to come on and change channels to a sports channel, was that kind of sign that we all would like to have after someone dies. My brother Ron, my mother just took it in stride. My brother Ron looked at me, his eyes got wide. It's like, what was that? And I said, yeah, that's dad. So um, it's important. It's, to watch for those things as well. All right. But that workbook, thank you for mentioning that, that book, Barry Prankster. It is a very useful tool, I think, for everybody. And everybody really does need some help. If you hear that spirits are hanging around, that ghosts hang around sometimes because they have unfinished business, if they're sticking around their family, the unfinished business is, or if you hear that people who are alive and in grief are holding them here, it's because they want to make sure you're okay. So it's helpful to work through your grief in the event that someone is still sticking around because they want to make sure you're okay. That's the unfinished business for most of them when it comes right down to it. All right, we're kind of winding down. I thought I'd mention here again, just to make sure everybody is aware, The next session of Ask Professor Paranormal is going to be December 21st, so in 2 weeks. Then we're skipping 3 weeks to January 11th. And that will be with a guest, Steve Gonzalez. You can ask questions of me and Steve. We'll just be having a conversation, but we'll definitely take questions throughout for that. Also, we'll mention the Rhine Education Center's next session of classes will start in February, beginning of February. The courses are not listed as yet on the website, which is just simply rhineedu.org. They're not listed yet, but they'll be listed before the end of the, certainly by Christmas, they should be listed. At least that's what I'm told by the executive director. I will be teaching 3 classes, 2 8-week classes, 1 4-week class. I'll be teaching a field investigations of apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists, so the basic investigations class from the parapsychology perspective. That's an 8-week class. I'll be teaching a course called Dreams and Altered States. So half the course is about dreams and psychic dreams specifically. And the second half will be about various altered states and how they relate to psychic abilities, like this meditation making more psychic, things like that. And then the third class I'll be teaching is a 4-week class for those of you who are interested in investigations, taking a deeper look at the tech and equipment and ghost hunting gear and things like that. And you may not be happy about what we decide about some of it, but the proper way to use some of the environmental stuff. There's some equipment that's out there that is highly questionable, so I'll talk about that and kind of what's the best to play with for that. So that's good. Those 3 classes are coming up in starting at the beginning of February. And let's see here. The other class, there will be other classes, also be a class on healing and psychokinesis, which John Cruth will be teaching. And I know that there's also a 4-week class on out-of-body experiences, which will be taught as well by Graham Watkins. So for those of you who are interested in out-of-body stuff and want to kind of travel beyond your body, that might be a good course for you to take as well. All right. So if you have any questions, you see my email is in the chat there. The easiest one is askparanormal@gmail.com. If you look at the channel description, you'll also see links to many other organizations that are out there. And of course, you can also visit my website, lloydauerbach.com, and connect with me from there. And if you want the spoon bending stuff, the PK party stuff, just let me know. Other questions? If you have questions for me to address on this show next time, I always appreciate getting questions in advance. So I hope everybody has a great couple of weeks before Christmas and Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever it is you celebrate. Solstice, this is the time of year for the winter solstice with so many different traditions have celebrations. So if you have a celebration before I see you next, happy holidays with whatever it happens to be. Otherwise, we'll pass it along afterwards as well. So thanks again for joining. We'll see you next time. May the force be with you.